I'm Dr. Leslie Blankenship-Williams, and I'm going to be walking you through Lab Exercise 1. Now, unfortunately, this is not the most exciting lab. It deals with mathematics, specifically looking at conversions and then how to calculate and express concentrations. So in this first part of the tutorial, we are going to be looking at conversions. But before we get started with conversions, we need to first understand that in science, the standard unit of measurement is the metric system, which does not match what we use to measure things in our day-to-day life. So for instance, if I were to ask you how much you weigh, which is usually a faux pas, but let's just say that you would give me an answer, you would probably give me an answer in pounds. So you would say 150 pounds or 180 pounds or some number in pounds. But in science, we don't use pounds. We use the metric system, which is based on grams to weigh something. So in science, your weight is measured in kilograms. Therefore, we need to be able to convert from something like pounds to something like kilograms. If you weigh 150 pounds, how many kilograms do you weigh? So that's one of the things that we're going to be getting into. The other thing that we're going to get into is looking at changing the scale of your units of measurement. So for instance, in the metric system, length is measured in meters. So a meter is bigger than the frame of this screen. But what if I wanted to measure something that was really tiny, like maybe so tiny that I actually needed a microscope to measure it? Then I would say, oh, it's 0.00001,256 meters. That's not very useful. So what we're going to do is change our perspective and change our scale. Instead of looking at meters, we might look at millimeters, which is very small. So this is about 1 millimeter, or maybe centimeters, or micrometers. So we're going to be looking at that as well. Conversely, if we wanted to get really big, we might not want to say, oh, you're traveling from, point A to point B, and we would say maybe like 10 kilometers rather than 10,000 meters. So again, changing the scale is also important. So let's go ahead and get started. So to get started, we're going to learn about some units of measurement that are commonly used in scientific studies. Science relies on the metric system as their standard for units of measurement. So if we want to measure the length of something, then we are going to measure in meters, which is denoted by a lowercase m. If you want to measure the volume of something, then we are going to measure in liters, which is denoted by an uppercase L. If we want to measure the mass of something or the weight of something, then we're going to use grams, which is denoted by a lowercase g. Sometimes it makes more sense to change our perspective or our scale. Using meters, liters, or grams is too big or too small for our purpose. So to do so, we would change our perspective by adding a prefix in front of one of those terms. And the prefixes are going to mean either much smaller or much bigger. So we're going to learn that by first drawing out a scale, and then we're going to put 1 gram, 1 liter, or 1 meter. And then what we're going to do is look at the prefixes that mean bigger than that, like kilo, and then look at the prefixes that mean smaller than that, like micro. But before we get into that, we actually need to learn about powers of 10. Because when we look at these changing scales, they're always going to be in powers of 10. Before introducing you to the appropriate prefixes, let's take a trip down memory lane and recall how to express powers of 10. If I have 100, that is 10 times 10, which is 10 to the power of 2. If I have 10,000, that is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. And you can see there are 4 tens or 4 zeros, and that is 10 to the power of 4. Now what if I have 1,000,000? A million is 10 to the power of what? Why don't you pause the video and give it a shot, see if you can figure out the answer. All right, we can figure out the answer by counting the zeros. There are 6 zeros, so this is 10 to the power of 6. Now sometimes we want to do the power of 10 in the denominator, like 1 over 100. Well, 1 over 100 is 1 over 10 times 10, which is 1 over 10 to the power of 2. But to express that, we actually use 10 to the negative 2. Likewise, 1 over 10,000 is 1 over 10 to the power of 4, which is expressed 10 to the negative 4. Here I have 1 over 10 million. Let's see if you can do it. That would be what? Again, we're going to count our zeros. There are 7 of them, but because the 10s are on the denominator, we make that a negative 7. Now that we've reviewed powers of 10, let's take a look at our scale. We're going to start on the bigger side of things. There's really only one prefix that means bigger, and that is kilo, which is expressed with a lowercase k. And kilo means 1,000 or 10 to the 3. So you can put kilo in front of grams, liters, or meters. So if I have 1 kilometer or kilometer, that actually means 1,000 meters or 10 to the 3 meters. But I can have a kiloliter, which just means 10 to the 3 liters. Likewise, I can have a kilogram, which simply means 1,000 grams. Notice these are being expressed in powers of 10. Now let's turn and take a look at the smaller side of the scale. I have one prefix that means 10 to the minus 1, which is 1 over 10. I have a prefix that means 10 to the minus 2, or 1 over 100. I have a prefix that means 10 to the minus 3, or 1 over 1,000. I also have one that means 10 to the minus 6, which is 1 over 1,000,000, and then 10 to the minus 9 as well. So what are they? 10 to the minus 1 is deci, or lowercase d. 1/100th is centi, or lowercase c. 1/1000th is milli, or lowercase m. And then 1 over 1,000,000, or 10 to the minus 6, is micro. But we've already used m, so we're going to use a different symbol called mu, which looks like a U with a dip in the front. Finally, 10 to the minus 9 is nano, or lowercase n. The prefixes centi and milli are probably familiar to you because you've worked with a meter stick, and we know that a meter stick can be broken up into 100 centimeters. So 100 centimeters equals a meter. Likewise, 1,000 millimeters equals a meter as well. So how does this correspond to this 10 to the minus 3 that we see for milli? Well, if we know that 1,000 millimeters equals a meter, and we divide both sides by 1,000, then we have 1 millimeter equals 1 over 1,000 meters, which is just 1 over 10 to the 3rd meters, which we've learned really is 10 to the minus 3 meters. So 1 milli equals 10 to the minus 3, and that's what we show it with our scale. So we're familiar with millimeters and centimeters because we've worked with a ruler before, but now let's apply these prefixes to grams and liters. So I'm drawing out 3 example problems, and I'd like you to try to fill in the blank spaces to make these equivalent statements. In other words, 10 to the 6 what liters equals 1 liter. Go ahead and pause the video to give it a shot. So I'm going to fill in the answers for you, and then we're going to explore the first 2 in a little bit more detail. Now you might be surprised that even on the smaller end of the scale, I'm working with positive exponents like 10 to the 6, not 10 to the negative 6. And that can be confusing to some students. So let's take a look at micro in a little bit more detail. And so we have 10 to the 6 microliters equals 1 liter. If we divide both sides by 10 to the 6, then what we really are saying is 1 microliter equals 10 to the minus 6 liters. So again, a microliter is much, much, much smaller than a liter. And the same is true for deci. if we have 1 gram equals 10 decigrams, then what we're really saying is that 1 decigram equals 1/10 of a gram. As shown here. So now I'd like you to try your hand at figuring out 1 gram equals how many kilograms? Okay, so 1 kilogram equals 10 to the third grams, and we know that 1 kilogram equals 1,000 grams. If we divide both sides by 10 to the 3, then what we're really saying is that 1 gram is equal to 1 over 10 to the third kilograms, or 10 to the minus 3 kilograms. For students that are unfamiliar with conversions, a common mistake is to write out the conversion incorrectly. So let's use an example to illustrate this. We know that micro means 10 to the minus 6. So which of these conversions is the correctly written conversion? And you might be tempted to say the bottom one, because micro is 10 to the minus 6. But it is not the bottom one. It is the top one. The top one is the correct conversion. Now, how do I remember this? Personally, I remember that I can fit 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So centi is 10 to the minus 2, but yet when I write my conversion, it's 10 to the second centimeters equals 1 meter. In other words, I should have a bigger number for micro, centi, deci, or anything to the left of my scale on the smaller side than my 1 gram. Now, what about the converse? What if I said 1 microgram equals something? So which one of these is correct? Okay, so how do I know this? I know that a microgram is much smaller than a gram. So clearly 1 microgram doesn't equal 1,000,000 grams, which would be the top option. So in this case, the bottom option is actually the correct one. If you are still struggling with how to write these conversions at this point, you should probably get help from your instructor about some techniques that you might be able to use to learn how to write the conversions correctly, because you are going to need this as we move forward in our tutorial. So now we're going to learn how to do conversions between micro and milli, or centi and deci, or kilo and milli, using some strategies that I'm going to introduce you to. So I'm going to start with the problem that's actually on page 2, which is 80 microliters equals how many milliliters? Now, in order to do this, what we first need to do is set up kind of on the side some conversions that we already know. So for instance, how many microliters is in a liter? Well, we have 10 to the 6 microliters equals 1 liter. Now, the other thing that we need to do is we need to look at milli, because we have both micro and milli in this problem. So now what we're going to do is take a look at milli and say, okay, well, there's 10 to the third milliliters equals 1 liter. Now, it's important that we have these conversions set up off to the side before actually trying to solve our problem. So notice I identified micro and milli both in my problem, and so set up a conversion of microliters to liters and milliliters to liters. And now we can put that off to the side and go ahead and start our problem. So to start our problem, we start with 80 microliters. Now what do? I always take a multiplication sign, and then I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to put microliters down at the bottom. Now, why am I doing that? Because microliters are at the top, and I don't want microliters. I want milliliters. So I somehow want to get to milliliters. And to do that, I need to cancel out microliters. So I'm going to go ahead and put microliters down at the bottom. And now I'm going to come over to this area that I've set up to the side and see, well, which one of these conversions might work here? And it's the one with microliters. So I'm going to put 10 to the 6 microliters at the bottom and 1 liter at the top. So remember, that equals 1. Microliters cancel out, and now I have liters, but I don't want liters, I want milliliters. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to do another multiplication sign, a line, and liters goes down at the bottom. So now I'm going to use my other conversion that I have not yet used. I'll put 1 liter down at the bottom, 10 to the third milliliters on the top, and now I'm where I want to be. I'm at milliliters, so now I can just multiply across the numerator and the denominator and solve my problem. So I have 80 times 10 to the third milliliters over 10 to the 6th. And so if we solve that out, I'll go ahead and write it all out for you just so that you can see how to do these problems without a calculator. So 10 to the third is 3 tens, and then 10 to the 6th is 6 tens. And those tens are going to cancel out as shown, and that leaves us with 80 over 10 to the third. Again, canceling out the 0, and that's going to leave us with 0.08 milliliters. So 80 microliters equals 0.08 milliliters. Okay, so now we're going to try another problem that's actually not in your lab. It's a simpler problem, but it will allow us to explore the same technique that I just showed you in terms of how to approach these conversions. So this problem is 0.8 grams equals how many milligrams? So I'm going from grams to milligrams. In order to do that, I'm going to go down to my scale and realize that, oh, it's 10 to the third milligrams actually equals 1 gram. Okay, so now I can start my problem. I'll set that off to the side. 0.8 grams, multiplication sign, line, grams goes at the bottom. That allows me to place my conversion in the correct place. So I'm going to put a 1 down at the bottom, which means 10 to the third milligrams must go on the numerator. And voila, I have milligrams at the top. So that means that I am where I want to be. Grams cancel out, and I have 0.8 times 10 to the third milligrams over 1. And so solving this out, you'll see this is simply 800 milligrams. So now let's turn and take a look at a different problem that is actually in the lab. This one is 7.26 times 10 to the negative 3 grams equals how many micrograms? So to get started, we're going to look down at our scale and see that micro is 10 to the 6th. So we'll set up our conversion of 10 to the 6th micrograms equals 1 gram. Leave that off to the side and go ahead and start writing out our problem. So I'm going to write 7.26, but I'm actually going to put 10 to the third on the denominator rather than 10 to the minus third on the numerator. Multiplication sign, line, grams goes at the bottom. And of course, this allows me to put 1 gram at the bottom and 10 to the 6 micrograms at the top. Grams are going to cancel out. I have micrograms, so I'm where I want to be. And that means I'm done with my problem. I just need to multiply everything across. So I have 7.26 times 10 to the 6 micrograms over 10 to the 3. If you were to go ahead and figure all that out, you would realize 10 to the 6 over 10 to the 3 is actually just 10 to the 3. So another way to write this out is going to be 7.26 times 10 to the 3 micrograms. Or if you want to write out the whole number, you can write it out as 7,260 micrograms. Okay, now we're going to do another problem that is not in the lab. So in this case, we're going to figure out how many microliters is equal to 5 centiliters. Now to start this problem, I'm going to go down to my scale and set up some conversions off to the side that I might use. So I'll start with centi. I know that 10 to the second centiliters is going to equal 1 liter. And then I'm also going to look at micro. And so micro, I have 10 to the 6 microliters equals 1 liter. Now that I've set those up off to the side, now I'm going to go ahead and try my problem. So I start with 5 centiliters, multiplication sign, line, centiliters goes on the bottom. I come over here and I realize the top conversion is probably what I want because it has a centiliter in it, which means that I can put the 10 to the second down there. And then I can put 1 liter up at the top. Centiliters are going to cancel out. I have liters. I don't want liters. I want microliters, so I'm going to keep going. Multiplication sign, line, liters at the bottom. Now I'm going to use my second conversion, put the 1 at the bottom, and that means the 10 to the 6 microliters is going to go at the top. Liters cancels out. I'm left with microliters. This is where I want to be. So I am done. Now I just need to multiply everything across. There's two ways to write this out. And you'll note in the 50,000 example there are 4 zeros, so that's 5 times 10 to the 4. Then 4 zeros is 4 tens. So now that we've done some example problems, I'm going to give you some practice problems to try that are also not in the lab. So these are for you to try out on your own and see if you can solve them. Go ahead and pause the video once you see them. There are 2. And then see if you can solve them on your own. Let's start with the first problem. We need to set up the conversions that we're going to apply first. So I have kilo and deci, so I'm going to set those up. Now I'm ready to get started. So I'm going to have 3.2 kiloliters, multiplication sign, line, and kiloliters goes on the bottom, so I can cancel that out. Now I know to invoke the top conversion factor, so I'm going to put the 1 with kiloliters on the bottom, and 10 to the 3rd liters on the top. Kiloliters cancels out, but I'm with liters. I don't want liters, I want deciliters, so multiplication sign, line, and liters go on the bottom. Now I can use the second conversion factor. I'll put the 1 on the bottom, and I'll put 10 deciliters on the top. I now have deciliters. That's exactly where I want to be, so I am done. I simply need to multiply across the top. So 3.2 times 10 to the 3rd times 10 deciliters. That's equal to 3.2 times 10 to the 4th deciliters. And we're done. So now let's take a look at the second problem. 9 times 10 to the 6 nanometers equals how many millimeters? Once again, we need to set up our conversions that we put off to the side. We're going to start with nano. Nano is 10 to the 9th, so 10 to the 9th nanometers equals 1 meter. I also have a millimeter in there, so my second one that I will invoke will be 10 to the 3rd millimeters, also equals 1 meter. Now that I have those conversions, I'm ready to get started on my problem. So 9 times 10 to the 6 nanometers, multiplication sign, line, nanometers goes at the bottom. So I can invoke my first conversion. 10 to the 9th goes on the bottom, which means 1 meter goes on the top. Nanometers canceled out. I have meters, but I don't want meters, so I'm going to put another multiplication sign, a line, and meters goes on the bottom. That allows me to use the second conversion factor as shown. Now I'm at millimeters, which is exactly where I want to be. So at this point, I'm going to multiply across the top and the bottom. So I have 9 times 10 to the 6 times 10 to the 3rd millimeters over 10 to the 9th. Now, that's just 9 tens on the top and 9 tens on the bottom, so those all cancel out, and I'm left with 9 millimeters. Okay, hopefully you've been able to follow along these conversion problems, because we're about to change gears and take a look at going between different types of units of measurement. Now we're going to adjust our focus and look at other types of conversions that go between different ways to measure things. So most often this is going from English to metric, but it can be other types like going from quarts to liters to ounces, etc. So I'm setting up 4 example problems for you that go between 2 different units to measure something, length, weight, etc. And then we're going to use the conversions that are listed on page 2 of the lab and try to solve them. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's look at the first example. We have 3 yards equals how many centimeters? The first thing that we need to do is get out of yards and get into something related to centimeters. And looking at the conversions listed on page 2, I have 1 yard equals 0.914 meters. So we're going to use that. But I don't want to end at meters. I know I want to go all the way to centimeters. So I also want to set up a conversion between centimeters and meters. And so that's shown here. The techniques to do these conversions are the same as the ones that we just explored. So we're going to start with 3 yards, multiplication sign, and yards goes at the bottom. Now I'm going to use my top conversion factor, which has yards in it, put the 1 at the bottom, and then 0.914 meters at the top. Yards are going to cancel out, but I'm in meters. I don't want to be in meters, I want to be in centimeters. So multiplication sign, line, and meters goes at the bottom. This allows me to use my second conversion factor, which is shown here. Meters cancel out. I'm at centimeters, which is where I want to be, and now I simply need to multiply across the top. I'm going to use a handy-dandy calculator here and figure out the answer for you. Multiplying all of this across gives us 274 centimeters. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at another problem. I'm actually going to do the third one down, which is 2 miles equals how many kilometers? So to start, I need some sort of conversion out of miles. And when I look at the conversions offered on page 2, I see that 1 mile equals 1,609 meters. But I want kilometers, so I need a conversion between meters and kilometers. Once I set those up, I'm ready to get started. So 2 miles, multiplication sign, line, miles goes at the bottom. That allows me to plug in my first conversion, which is 1 mile equals 1,609 meters. Miles are going to cancel out. I have meters. I don't want meters, so I'm going to put meters at the bottom. That allows me to use my second conversion, which is 10 to the third meters, is 1 kilometer. Meters cancels out, and I have appropriately set up my problem. Now I'm not going to solve it. It's really just about setting it up. You can multiply across and figure out the answer. So now let's try the bottom problem. In this case, I need to get out of inches, so I'm going to use a conversion on page 2, which says 1 inch equals 2.54 centimeters. So let's get started and see where that takes us. I have 3 inches, multiplication sign, line, and inches goes at the bottom. Now this is going to allow me to use that conversion factor where 1 inch equals 2.54 centimeters. Inches cancel out. I'm in centimeters, but I want to be in millimeters. So what I need to do now is figure out if I can go from centimeters to millimeters. So I'm going to set up a couple other conversions off to the side now that I'm here. And let's see if I can invoke these and get to millimeters. So now I'm going to add in a multiplication sign, a line, put centimeters on the bottom. That will allow me to use the first conversion, and centimeters cancel out. I'm going to do another multiplication sign, a line, and now I'm going to be putting 1 meter on the bottom and 10 to the third millimeters on top. Meters are going to cancel out, and I am at millimeters, which is exactly where I want to be. So now all I need to do is multiply everything across on the top and the bottom and solve for the answer. So at this point, I'm going to stop. I'm going to let you try the 115 pounds to kilograms conversion on your own, If you've been able to follow this tutorial this far, you should be able to solve that problem on your own. And now what we're going to do is transition into some other properties of conversions. So now we're going to pivot and look at some conversions that apply to pure water. Now in physiology, we're concerned about the water of your body, which is not pure water. There's other stuff dissolved in it. But these conversions are still useful, and we can approximate our own aqueous solutions using these conversions. So I'm going to start by assuming that we fill a 1 centimeter cubed space with water. So that means every side is 1 centimeter, so it's 1 centimeter cubed. Now this is equal to 1 milliliter of volume. And although you probably don't have a good vision of what 1 milliliter is, it's effectively a very, very large drop. Now if I were to take that 1 milliliter or 1 centimeter cubed and put it on a scale, how much would that 1 milliliter of water weigh? Well, interestingly enough, it would weigh just about exactly 1 gram. So this is our conversion. 1 centimeter cubed equals 1 milliliter equals 1 gram. Now it's important to note that this only applies to water, does not apply to all liquids, doesn't apply to alcohols, and it doesn't apply to oils. So now let's consider that you were to weigh out 3 grams of water. How much would you have in terms of volume? Well, it might seem pretty obvious because 1 milliliter equals 1 gram. So if I have 3 grams, I must have 3 milliliters of water. But we can apply our same techniques that we've been using this whole time and confirm that that is in fact the correct answer. And you can see that here. Now what if I were to ask you how many liters of water is in 3 grams of water? So if you weigh out 3 grams of water, how many liters is that? Again, we're just adding another step to this conversion where we have to go from milliliters to liters. So let's watch. We know that we have 3 milliliters of water. We're going to put 10 to the 3 down at the bottom, 1 liter at the top, and that gives us 3 over 10 to the 3 liters. That's the same thing as 3 times 10 to the negative 3 liters, which if you plug in a calculator is 0.003 liters. Now one of the questions in the lab that seems rather strange asks you how many 1 millimeter cubes are going to be in 1 centimeter cubed. Now why would that be in this lab? Well, the answer lies in how red blood cell and white blood cell counts are determined. It turns out that when you take a drop of blood and you determine how many red blood cells are in there or how many white blood cells are in there, it's expressed per millimeter cubed of fluid. So we kind of need to know, well, how much is that? So we're going to start by asking this question. Well, how many 1 millimeter cubed is in 1 centimeter cubed? So we know that there are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. And you can look at a ruler and figure that out. So if I were to draw a giant cube that measures 1 centimeter on every side, obviously this is not drawn to scale, this would represent 1 centimeter cubed. So the question is, how many 1 millimeter cubes can you fit in there? So the way to do this is to remember that each 1 centimeter is actually 10 millimeters, and that would be true on all sides. So I'm going to break up all of the sides into 10 millimeters. So what that really means is that I could actually fit 10 times 10 times 10 millimeter cubes in a 1 centimeter cubed space. And you can kind of see my poor drawing here where I'm trying to draw out the fact that there is a row of 10 1 millimeter cubes. And then you can see, you could imagine it going backwards to a sheet to make 100 of them, and then going up into the cube to make 1,000. So if 1 centimeter cubed equals 10 millimeters times 10 millimeters times 10 millimeters, that's 1,000 millimeter cubes, then you should be able to fit 1,000 1 millimeter cubes inside 1 centimeter cubed, which is equal to 1 milliliter of water. So if I take a drop of blood and it is 1 milliliter of blood, that is actually 1,000 millimeters cubed. So now we're going to erase all this and ask a different question. If I have 1 millimeter cubed of aqueous fluid, how many microliters is that going to be? So 1 millimeter cubed equals how many microliters? So let's take a look at some of the conversions that we could use. We know that 1,000 millimeter cubed is equal to 1 centimeter cubed. We just established that. We know that 1 centimeter cubed is equal to 1 milliliter. Now we have to go from milliliters to microliters. So let's do that. We know that 10 to the 6 microliters equals a liter, and 10 to the 3rd milliliters also equals a liter. Now I'd like you to pause the video and try solving this conversion on your own. You have the tools that you need in blue on the right. If you struggle, you can always push play and watch the problem being solved. But if you can get to the right answer without watching it being done, then you should feel pretty confident about your ability to do conversions. Now let's apply these techniques to a slightly different type of problem. Let us assume that I take some blood, which has hemoglobin in it, and I tell you that there are 120 grams of hemoglobin per liter of blood. So this is a concentration, 120 grams per liter of blood. And what I want to know is if I take 2 deciliters of that blood, how much hemoglobin is going to be in there? So the way that you set up this problem is to ignore the concentration to start with and really ask, what is the question asking? And in this case, the question is saying, I have 2 deciliters of blood. How much hemoglobin is in there? So that's our question. Well, it turns out that 120 grams of hemoglobin per liter of blood can be a conversion because that's given as a known fact. So with that, we can use that as a conversion and go ahead and set up our problem. So we're going to start with our known volume, which is 2 deciliters. So that's actually what we're starting with. We're going to do a multiplication sign and a line and then put deciliters at the bottom. Then I come over here to 120 grams equals 1 liter of blood. That's not deciliters, but I need to somehow get from deciliters to liters to be able to use that. So I'm going to go ahead and set up another conversion. 10 deciliters equals 1 liter. I'll plug that in, and that gives me liters. So now I can put liters at the bottom and use my 120 grams equals 1 liter of blood. So let's go ahead and plug that in. Put 1 at the bottom and then 120 grams of hemoglobin at the top. So now I'm at grams of hemoglobin, so I'm where I want to be. I'll go ahead and finish solving it out, and I have my answer. 24 grams of hemoglobin is in 2 deciliters of this person's blood. Now you have a similar problem to solve in your lab, and you can use this one as a model to help you solve that problem. So we're going to end our tutorial with 2 more problems. This one is taken directly from the lab. It says 5 million red blood cells, or RBC, are found in 1 millimeter cubed of blood. How many red blood cells are found in a full liter of blood? So in order to address this question, we have to set it up correctly. So really what we're asking is for a number, how many red blood cells? And what we want to start with is a liter of blood. So a liter of blood contains how many red blood cells? So I'm not going to solve this entire problem for you, but I am setting it up by reminding you that we're going to use the concentration as a conversion. So 5 million is 5 with 6 zeros after it, or 5 times 10 to the 6 red blood cells. And again, that's going to be equal to 1 millimeter cubed of blood. And then earlier we learned that 1 millimeter cubed of blood equals 1 microliter. So what you're going to need to do now is go from microliters to liters in order to solve this. So again, you'll start with 1 liter, multiply, line, put liters on the bottom. Nothing in here is going to be helpful, but the closest thing we have is microliters. So you're going to need to go from liters to microliters and then apply those 2 conversion factors to finally get to a number. So the final type of problem that we're going to look at is something that's actually quite practical to the field of nursing, and that is learning how to dose drugs based on the weight of the patient. So drugs are often administered by the weight of the patient. In other words, you wouldn't give the same dose to an infant as you would to a 250-pound adult. So many drugs are calibrated based on what are called mgs per kg. In other words, you give a certain milligram of drug or microgram of drug per kilogram of weight. So let's look at an example where we know the weight of somebody in pounds. Let's say an infant weighs 12 pounds, and you have a drug that you need to administer to that infant. And the drug is scheduled as 3 mgs per kilogram of weight. But the weight that you have is not in kilograms, it's in pounds. So the question is, how many milligrams of this drug X is the infant going to receive? So let's write out what we know from this word problem. We know that we have an infant that weighs 12 pounds. We know that drug X is scheduled to be delivered at 3 milligrams of that drug per kilogram of weight. So for every kilogram of body weight, there would be 3 milligrams of drugs. We also know from the conversions on page 2 of the lab that 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds. So with that, let's go ahead and see if we can move forward on this problem. Now again, part of it is setting the question up correctly. What we're really interested in is if somebody is 12 pounds, how many milligrams of that particular drug are they going to get? Okay, so let's go ahead and start our problem by 12 pounds, multiplication sign line, pounds go at the bottom. We're going to use the conversion that has pounds in it, and that's the one marked by the blue arrow. So we'll put 2.2 at the bottom, 1 kilogram at the top. Pounds cancel out, and I'm in kilograms, but I don't want kilograms, I want mgs. So I'm going to put kilograms at the bottom, and now I get to apply that conversion. So 1 kilogram of weight is 3 mgs of drugs, and I have reached where I want to be. So now I simply pull out my calculator and finish solving this problem. And that concludes our first tutorial on Lab 1. So we've covered the metric system and we've covered conversions. And in our next tutorial, we will get into concentrations and how to express concentration.